Alright, so hopefully you get the idea. This takes a really long time. The clip that I just showed you took 25 minutes. 25 minutes for her to get almost all of those laid. Maybe that's 20 eggs there, maybe not. I'm guessing somewhere around 20, probably just under 20. And that's 25 minutes, so like a minute an egg. You see, we got another one coming out, and I think it's like the whole getting it out, and then, you know, then it's putting it in place. That takes forever. I mean, it's a snail. It's moving at the pace of a snail. So this is part of, you know, this is how they lay their eggs. So you know, and for the record, it is nighttime in the fish room. I have another light turned on so that we can watch this, but it is nighttime in the fish room. I generally don't see them. This is the first time I've actually seen it and been able to capture it. I generally don't see them laying eggs during the daytime. Normally when I come in the morning is when I see all my eggs, so it's at nighttime that more than likely the mystery snails are, you know, laying all of their eggs. So if you're going to prep for them to lay at night. So yeah, that's them laying their eggs, and be prepared for it to take a few hours. Alright, so here is the day after that one snail that we saw laying her clutch last night. This is her clutch. It's kind of short and fat. That is quite possibly because of the water level. It's not very low, and because of the unique setup of this tank and all the things that hang into it, it gives them the ability to climb out. I've had egg clutches here. I have had snails in here even, so they'll find, you know, on that HOB, you can see I've had quite a few laid on that. They go where it's convenient. If you want them to lay, drop your water 2 inches, a minimum of 2 inches for them, so they have that space. It really helps them. It can even induce breeding, not breeding, but them to lay their eggs if they're like, oh, the water's finally dropped, awesome, I can go ahead and lay these eggs versus just absorbing them or laying them poorly. And if they lay them poorly, they very well may eat them, or they get knocked off, or, you know, I've seen clutches that are just basically collapsed, and I'm assuming they didn't have the space that they needed to lay it properly. So that is the clutch the day after. Now I'm definitely not going to move this. I'm not even going to touch it. I'll touch it so you see what happens, but that's actually fairly hard, and this was laid like at maybe 2 a.m. and it's 6 p.m., but I just crushed those ones right there. Yeah, you can see. Let me dry my hand off, and you can kind of see it's a little bit too dark. Let me move that light. But I basically just crushed, yeah, okay, there we go. Basically just crushed those ones in that bottom left corner. So what we need to do before we touch this is basically just let it set for at least, I generally go 24 to 36 hours. 24 is a good amount of time, so late tonight or probably tomorrow morning. So if you have a snail and you see, you know, they generally lay at night, and you come in the next morning and you see, oh, I've got a clutch. Don't wait till that evening. Generally wait till the next morning and you're good. To go ahead and pull it off. And I'll see if I have any to demonstrate that. But now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next part after you're able to pull your clutch off. For the most part, it's pretty easy. You just grab it, you know, on basically one side, put your 4 fingers on one side, so it, you know, that's the side you're going to push on, so you get a wide area of leverage and not just one finger where it may break it in half. So as much leverage as possible, and then pop it off. It generally comes off pretty easy. You can see all those other little ones there. That's from me, you know, pulling them off. They come off really easy on plastic, not so easy on glass, and it's really awkward to pull them off your HOB, but they do come off fairly easy. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step, which I think is very important, which is incubating the eggs. And I say it's important because my success rate versus incubating versus not incubating, where I just put a lid on the tank and try and keep it humid and even mist it sometimes, I have a 0% hatch rate when I don't incubate, and I try and let them raise up in the tank. And there's a lot of problems that I run into that I will explain here in just a moment. So for me, it is just a lot easier, simpler, and it just works so much more, better to incubate them. So anyways, we're gonna go ahead and look at my incubator for my mystery snails. And just to keep it fun and interesting while doing a water change, I forgot to unplug my heater. And something smelled like it was on fire. And sure enough, that was burning stuff. Didn't break that glass doing that to it. Wow. I don't know if that's good anymore though. That was cooking. That was cooking really, really hot. That was smoking, catching, about caught my aquarium plants on fire. So just gonna let this cool down out here for a little while. And back to the regular programming. Alright, so here we have my incubator, and I'll show you how I do mine. I know there's a lot of different ways to do this. I would definitely suggest that you go check out Rachel O'Leary's video. She uses like a piece of Tupperware and then puts that Tupperware with I think a few holes poked in it, like and floats that in the tank where she's raising the mystery snails. I want to see, I've seen people put them in like mesh breeder nets and just leave that in the tank so long as it's suspended. I've tried a lot of ways and it doesn't work for me. I made a little floating raft and put it, underneath my covered top inside of a tank, and it did nothing. And I even misted it and it did nothing. When I started doing this, my success rates went like up, way up. Now I do want to mention, not all eggs hatch. They won't all be fertile. Occasionally you'll get a problem. Maybe it just had too much calcium and the way she laid it didn't work out. This is how I do mine. I use a big piece of Tupperware to keep in a smaller container, and so I have a lid that doesn't fit. That's fine because I want air to still get in there. And then I use a piece of sponge, and it looks like none of these have hatched. I use a piece of sponge and then put water in the bottom. Now that keeps my humidity up. Looks like that might actually be a baby that hatched there, and I'll just toss him in their tank. So I think they might have eaten him. I'm not sure, but those are my extra male panda guppies. But yeah, I found this works great. I do keep a small heat pad under here. I found that helps keep them a little bit hotter. In this, I don't even think this works anymore, to be honest. It is plugged in. Like, I do have it plugged in, but I don't actually think that's heating. Yeah, that's not. So they still hatch. My fish room, especially down here, is in the 70s. I might, have to change that because we're about to get a little bit colder, and I might have to get a new heat pad. I found having that heat pad and keeping them around 78, 80 degrees, keeping the humidity up, which is why I use the water. And you don't want to keep them in the water, otherwise they will drown. And I think it more affects the shell casing. So you do want to keep them out of the water. Now when it comes to hatching, what they will eventually do, and how I test to see if mine are hatching, like that one, that one's just broken. What I simply do to see if mine are about to hatch, if they look different and they get really white, what the snails do is they eat the inside of that shell out until they're free. When I see it and I think they're about to hatch, all I do is I just tap on the egg, and like barely touching it, it will collapse. So that tells me, okay, they're ready to hatch. And at that point, you can either take that clutch and put it into your hatching tank, or you can let them sit there and eat the rest of that shell out, which I've done both, and they both seem to work. I generally let them finish eating their way out, just so they get that extra calcium. I will help break the clutch open to free them. So I'll break it open a little bit with my finger, and then I'll allow them to eat the rest of the clutch shell, so that they have that extra calcium. And that's basically my incubator, and it works really well for me. I haven't had any problems with it. You know, the colder it is, the longer it takes them to hatch. You don't want it too hot, not too cold. You know, about the temperature of your tropical aquarium, you know, between 76 and 82 degrees, you'll find your balance. All right, moving on to the tanks that I use to raise my baby mystery snails. I have 2 5-gallons up here with very thick mats of water lettuce on top and 2 tiny sponge filters in them. This seems to work very well. I definitely don't do as many water changes in here as I should be. That being said, they'll probably get one now. But how long has it been? It's been about a month, I think, since my last water change. Just under a month. And they seem to do fine. I feed my mystery snails primarily green beans. And I can show you here if they have any left over. They're all huddled up right here because they're eating green beans. Now I find that there's less waste in the aquarium because of that. You're feeding them what you're feeding them, they're basically going to eat it all. It's all vegetable matter and they like that. You're not feeding them something that's going to be high in flour and wheat, which really isn't on their diet. I found that feeding things like algae wafers of a lower quality will leave a lot of muck in the bottom of your aquarium and it looks bad. So I started feeding basically just green beans, canned green beans, and I'll show you my little stash of green beans up here that I use, and this is basically it. I could feed easily a can of these a day with my plecos and my mystery snails, but every day at least 1 can of green beans. Cut green beans, regular, doesn't have to be unsalted. If you can get unsalted, get it. It's better for them. They don't need that extra salt necessarily, but it's not going to hurt them. So I give them 1 can a day, goes into here, primarily because if I don't put a can a day in here, if they do not eat something substantial every single day, they will start leaving this aquarium. They will crawl out. And not just because I have the hoses hanging in and out, which makes it easier, but they will crawl out because they're in search of food and they're hungry. And they don't just do it in this aquarium. Any aquarium that I have them in that's uncovered, they'll crawl out of. I have quite a few of them in here just growing out, and also I use them to clean up after me. I feed this tank quite a bit. And I try and feed this tank daily, if not every other day, so that they don't leave the aquarium. That is a real problem. They will leave the aquarium if you do not feed them enough. And if yours hop out, just give them a green bean or something and they'll hang out for a little bit longer. That's my water change. Got to turn this off. So turn that off real quick. Remove that. If you want to know what this is, this keeps me from flooding my my fish room. If you want to get one of these, check out lrbaquatics.com. He has them listed in the things I use section, and it'll shoot you to a link where you can get one of these. But really helpful device. Basically, it works just like that. So very useful. It saved me a lot of wet floors and wet towels. But anyways. They get fed green beans as well. It works pretty good. Occasionally I guess I might throw in something else like fish food if I'm being lazy and I don't want to open a can of green beans, but that will muck up my tanks so much faster. So what I do with those baby clutches is I crush them open into here, or they've hatched out. Generally scoop them up with like a spoon and then dump them in here, and then I just do nothing. I just throw food in for them, make sure they have some type of food in there. I do keep a little bit of crushed coral on the bottom of these aquariums, so there's some type of calcium. You can take dead snail shells, put that in there, eggshells. Having calcium helps. Now, I think that's, at the point in time where I should mention, or I'm at the point in time where I should mention, my water parameters are in the hard alkaline area. My TDS is 300 plus. My pH is generally 7.8 to 8.2, sometimes even more than that, depending on the season and what the water company does to my water. So my water is hard and alkaline. I have a lot of calcium here. I'm from Texas. Every creek I ever go to has nothing but a limestone bottom. So tons of calcium where I'm at. My water has a lot of calcium in it too, and they seem to do good on that alone. Now, when they get a bit older, it's a little bit different. I do want to address that. I have one who's showing it here. It's that one over there. That's a really, really big snail, by the way, and that's mystery. That is not an apple snail. That one doesn't have it. That one there has it, and it's a cleft shell. Now, occasionally I get it, and what it is they're growing faster than their shell can grow with them. And basically it's a calcium deficiency in their food, not necessarily in their water. More than likely it's a calcium deficiency in their food. So you want to make sure they have enough calcium in their food. See, that guy has a hole there. That's the beginning of a cleft shell. I have not gotten enough calcium into his diet. I have this cuttlebone here. I don't know if they're not eating that enough. It kind of looks like they're not. But they will also graze on each other. That one there, you can see that's not very good or pretty shell growth. And you know, part of that's just it doesn't have enough calcium in the diet. Things you can do to correct that, and what would be best is to make Snello. What Snello is something you can easily Google good recipes for. Basically what they do for Snello, it's a bunch of snail crazy people, snail enthusiasts, generally, you know, underwater snail enthusiasts. But what you do is you take gelatin, just plain regular gelatin, and you mix 1 packet of gelatin per like 4 ounces of baby food, like 1 jar baby food. And then you can also throw in a little bit of fish food ground up, some krill ground up, a little bit of spirulina, nothing more than like, you know, a teaspoon or 2 of extra stuff, and then a little bit of extra calcium. If you do that, you will not get cleft lip. If you throw in extra calcium into their diet, whether you're buying calcium-rich food, and that's what that is. They need the calcium in their diet, not just in the water. You can dose, you know, the marine calciums to the water. I wouldn't do that if you have fish, because you're messing with your TDS heavily. I would not do that if you have fish. Leave your water alone. If you want to care for your snails, add crushed coral. That will mess with your water, and it will mess with your fish. So don't do it unless you have African cichlids that need it. The best thing that you can do is offer them high calcium foods. What this is calcium carbonate. I got this on eBay. I got like 5 pounds of it for maybe $20, probably not even that. And it's basically ground up limestone, and it's just heavy in calcium. What limestone actually is a sedimentary rock that is from old marine animal shells, like invertebrates, crustaceans, all those shells break up over time and become a sediment underneath the ocean. The earth sucks it down, pushes it back up, and it creates limestone. Geology 101. But yeah, and that's what that is. That's just ground up old crustacean shells. It's, you know, calcium carbonate. And that right there is safe to give them in their food. You could also take up eggshells, grind those up into a fine powder, put that into the food. Just Google Snello, S-N-E-L-L-O, and you should get some decent recipes on how to make a good snail jello. And it's fairly easy, and it's definitely good for them. So I think that covers just about everything. Maybe a few more points on breeding or my grow out tanks. Alright, so post video editing now. I totally realized I forgot something that's very, very important here, and I apologize. I'll cut to the chase. 2 things. Mystery snails are, you know, gender specific. There are males and there are females. I think that kind of goes to say when you have females laying eggs, but maybe they all lay eggs. That's not the case. There are males and there are females. The easiest way I know to tell whether or not you have a male or female, if the snails are the same age, the females will be bigger. There is another way. I personally haven't done it. I have so many snails, there's kind of not a reason for me to do it. But there is another way. You can pick up the snail, put them on their back. They'll pull their body out trying to right themselves. And when they do that, they'll have their genitalia, more or less, somewhere in their shell, and they all have breathing tubes that they put up towards the surface and that they breathe from. And either you're going to see their breathing tube or you're going to see their genitalia. If it's genitalia, like a long tube, it's a male, but they may also have a breathing tube. So I personally don't know how to sex them that way. I can tell you females are generally bigger. They're absolutely bigger when you get, you know, to a full-grown age. Your females are going to be, you know, golf ball size, where your males might be cherry size or a little bit bigger. So females are always going to be bigger. If you're looking to buy them, generally when I bought them to breed, I think I started with like 20, 25, and I was like going to PetSmarts, Petco's. Local fish stores had no selection, so PetSmarts and Petco's. And then I did get my magentas from a breeder on Aquabid. Now, I don't think I mentioned this, but you can get some from me. I have a lot right now. Just email me. My email's in my About section. If you want some, I can ship them out. Shipping's probably going to be the most expensive part, because it's $15 to $20 to ship, where the snails might be $2, around the $2 range, not more than $2, possibly less. Depends on how many you want. If you want two, it's gonna be $4 for two of them. But bigger orders will get you cheaper amounts, for cheaper amounts. I can absolutely just make it clear. I'm not going to give you only females because you think you only have males. I'm not going to do that. It leaves my customers and me with less of a specific gender. So what I can do is ensure that you get a good ratio of both, depending on mine, on what ratios I have. And I have a fairly decent ratios, because I've got 50, 60, 70 snails, and tons of them growing out. So I have plenty of males, plenty of females. So I can give you, you know, at least a 50-50 ratio of males to females, and that'll be generally going off of size. So you'll get some bigger ones, you'll get some smaller ones, and I'll try and do my best to get, you know, to gauge that they're the same age. Now, one other thing I need to add to this video's long, and I'm sorry, but what is the best way to get your snails to breed? You've had snails, you've dropped the water level, and they're not laying eggs. Well, they need to eat all the time. Like I've said, they'll jump, like I'm going to say or have said, they'll jump out of your aquarium if you're not feeding them. And mine do it if I skip 2, 3, especially 5 days of feeding, where I just don't feed them. And I had to learn this the hard way. That's why I throw in a can of green beans. They just jump out. And I would go 3 days without feeding, and they would I would lose 3, 4, 5 just to them being on the floor. And most of the time I can pick them up, they're fine. They tuck back in. They have that trap door, which allows them to seal in their, you know, their bodily fluids to keep from drying out and dying. They do rely on that water in that sense. But the best way to get them to breed, because they have to eat so much, is feed them a lot. Mine lay eggs pretty consistently, because I'm dumping in a can of green beans a day. They have enough to eat from, you know, the morning when I feed them until late evening. They're just grazing and chomping down on green beans. They eat some, they go walk around or slide around, whatever, and then they go back and they eat, and they just do that all day. They just constantly eat. That's what detritivores and worms and a lot of the creatures we keep in aquariums do naturally. They just eat all day. That's how they eat. You look at gazelles, cows, whatever, they all eat all day. You look at gorillas, 8 hours of their day is spent eating. So that's natural for things to graze for long periods of time and always have food. If you want them to breed, bit off topic, excuse me, I digress, but if you want them to breed now fast and heavily and more eggs, the best thing you can do is feed high calcium foods. One of my favorites is crab cuisine from Hokari. It's got calcium, it's made for invertebrates, it's made for crayfish, snails, shrimp. It's safe for them, it's going to have extra calcium. It's, you know, when I used to dump that stuff in, and it gets expensive, that's why I don't. I used to dump that stuff in, and I got my biggest clutches, like 2-3 inch long clutches, out of a single snail that wasn't even that big, just from giving them that excess calcium. So that being said, make some Snello. I think I'm going to explain that at some point in this video. Make some Snello, some good calcium, and some good vegetables, and feed them a lot. and that will boost the rate that they breed and really the rate that they lay eggs. So anyways, I hope that helps, and we'll get back to the regular video. Alright, so I'm trying to think everything that I can before I end this. So I add them in after they've hatched out of their clutch, or once the clutch becomes soft, you can add them to their grow out tank, which doesn't need to be one of these. I prefer it to be. I find that my grow out and survival rates are a lot better if I shrink the tank down to just baby snails. That way they don't have to compete with adult snails who, I don't know, chomp on their shells, or fish that will eat them. Cichlids will eat snails. So I find that this works better for me. And about this size, actually a little bit bigger, about that size, once they get dime size, I start pulling them out and placing them in just normal tanks. So you see that gold one there, a couple of those brown ones, those are ready to move out into a larger tank. And then occasionally they do get fed to the Fahaka if he's been a good puffer fish. Isn't that right? He's just sleeping, so he's day sleeping. But yeah, so I really think that covers just about everything. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'll do my best to get to them. So anyways, guys, I think that is it. We've got grow out tank, we've got incubator, and then we have our big, beautiful adult snails. So yeah, anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.